You're listening to a Tax Justice Network podcast covering the 10 worst global offenders identified by the Financial Secrecy Index in 2018. In sixth place is Luxembourg with a secrecy score of 58.20 out of 100 and over 12% of the global market. I'm Naomi Fowler, talking to tax justice campaigner Anthea Lawson. Luxembourg is number 6 on the Financial Secrecy Index, often referred to as the Death Star of Europe by the Tax Justice Network, the Death Star of financial secrecy, because of its very aggressive stance over the years in fighting tooth and nail against European Union transparency initiatives. What are the indicators telling us this time round in the 2018 Financial Secrecy Index about this location?
Luxembourg remains in the same place, at 6th place. It's got a more moderate secrecy score compared to, say, Switzerland, but it has a big share of the global market for offshore financial services, and that bumps it up the index. TGN was calling it the Death Star of financial secrecy in Europe when it was at 3rd and 2nd place, and since then it has signed up to some of the new transparency initiatives, such as the Common Reporting Standard for sharing tax information automatically across borders, but there are still some significant secrecy factors which are keeping it in the top 10.
Right, and of course Luxembourg was the home of one of the most earth-shattering leaks for the European Union, which was Lux Leaks, where 2 PricewaterhouseCoopers employees, Raphael Allais and Antoine Deltour, working with a journalist, released the shocking evidence of very, very cosy deals, and they call them comfort letters, arrangements, very cosy tax arrangements, tax rulings they call them, between the Luxembourg Tax Authority, brokered by PricewaterhouseCoopers, and some very, very large multinational companies. And that led to a lot of angst in Luxembourg and among the multinational companies, and that led to the European Union investigating whether or not state aid rules, anti-competition rules of the European Union had been violated. And in fact they have ruled that some multinational companies that were enjoying some of these advantageous deals would have to pay some of the money back to various jurisdictions, not just Luxembourg, Ireland as well in particular. So big impact from Luxembourg on the rest of the European Union.
Yeah, and in Luxembourg that didn't go down too well. And Luxembourg is a secrecy jurisdiction, and so the whistleblowers all found themselves on trial for leaking the data. 2 of them were the two who worked for PwC, one of the big 4 accounting firms. They were handed suspended sentences and fines. The journalist they gave the information to was acquitted. Now, one of the 2, Antoine Deltour, who was a junior auditor at PwC, has very recently had his conviction quashed on appeal by Luxembourg's highest court. And the judge said that he should have been recognised as a whistleblower, which is a very good recognition. But the other one, Raphael Allais, his conviction was upheld. He's still appealing to Strasbourg, but he's still been convicted of leaking this data. And there's been interviews with them. There's plenty of information that people can find online about what really happened. And they've had a really tough time. It's not been an easy experience at all. So this is what happens in secrecy jurisdictions that have serious banking secrecy laws if you leak data.
Right, as they discovered. Luxembourg has, as I said, it's fought tooth and nail against some of these transparency initiatives, and one of the ways it's tried to kind of dodge the transparency bullet is that, it has no plans for a public register of the real owners of companies or even a central register. And, it is actually the 2nd largest home of funds after the United States. So we're talking about a colossal amount of money in this jurisdiction. That's a pretty serious situation to have with such an important jurisdiction not complying, not being willing to comply with these international transparency measures.
Yes, and it has a huge impact on the very issue that was coming out in the Lux Leaks data, which is that if it's possible to set up a company or other form of entity in Luxembourg without having to say on the public record who owns it, then multinational companies who are doing so in order to shift their profits to Luxembourg and avoid paying tax elsewhere, it's not clear if they're setting up companies to do so, even in the wake of these EU rulings. So all of that secrecy is still there. There are countries putting public registers in place. There are countries which are resisting that, but at least putting a central register in place. Luxembourg is not doing these. Now, OK, they've done one thing. They have technically stopped allowing bearer shares, which are a particularly secret form of company ownership, which is essentially if you hold the piece of paper that says you own part of the company, then that's the only record that you own that bit of the company. It's completely untraceable. So now the information needs to be held by a private custodian, and that is the way that these bearer shares have been immobilised, which is the technical term for it. But that is not a central register. It's definitely not public, and it's definitely not transparency. So Luxembourg is the second largest home of funds after the US. Now, TGN is concerned about the potential use of funds in a secrecy jurisdiction because they can potentially act as a wrapper to protect against the individuals who've invested in them being identified as the real owner of the underlying assets and the income they produce. How might that work? If a fund is incorporated as a company and opens a bank account, the bank is required to understand who owns the company. And this information will now be used for automatic tax information exchange with other countries under the new OECD Common Reporting Standard rules. Now, the way that the ownership information is collected is based on a 25% threshold, which is the current standard. If nobody in the fund holds as much as 25%, which is jolly easy to arrange, then nobody is identified as an owner and the information is not exchanged. This is a potential risk.
Huge loophole there. What about developments looking ahead for the future? I mean, they're investing quite a lot in free ports, this nice place to put all kinds of assets out of sight, own anonymously and potentially not pay any tax on them.
Yes, so free ports are a risk because they're potentially usable to not pay tax, to launder money. Luxembourg has a new high-security Freeport warehouse to store assets like paintings and gold bars, with all the ample opportunity for financial mischief that offers. And technically, it's now included in the anti-money laundering laws in Luxembourg, which would require the owners of the assets to be identified, but it's likely that there are loopholes in that.
Right, and they're also expanding their role in providing so-called letterbox companies, which can be very helpful for multinational corporations who want to avoid paying tax in other countries.
Yeah, this is what a lot of the Lux Leaks information was about. These are company structures that aren't companies as you might recognise them with offices or employees. They're just a piece of paper. They might be a brass plate on a door if you're lucky, and a letterbox that are just a means of shifting money about to avoid tax. And despite the scandal caused by the leak, that's still big business in Luxembourg.
Yes, and I've seen some of those for myself. You can get buildings with thousands of companies that wouldn't possibly fit in one building if they were actually doing anything. And they're also looking towards Asia quite a lot in terms of moving towards new markets, like many of the jurisdictions on the Financial Secrecy Index. Luxembourg claims to be the second largest domicile for investment funds investing into mainland China after Hong Kong.
Yes, that's right. They're making big efforts to build up an Islamic finance industry to do business in the Middle East and in Asia. The point is, this is a financial sector that is looking to grow. And if its offering is still that of a secrecy jurisdiction, which this measurement of the index shows it is, then it's expanding that offering to new markets and becoming a more influential secrecy jurisdiction whose destructive effects will spread more widely.